According to Heat Street, Ontario has now passed a law that would allow the government to invade your home and strip you of your child if your little Billy comes home from school one day and announces he's little Sally, and if you have the temerity to tell him that he is not in fact Sally. By a shockingly broad margin of 63 to 23, the Supporting Children, Youth and Families Act of 2017 passed through the Ontario legislature. It tells child services and judges to consider factors including race, ancestry, place of origin, color, ethnic origin, citizenship, family diversity, disability, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression in removing a child from the home. Michael Couteau, who is the Minister of Child and Family Services, was explicit in his tyranny. He said, quote, "I would consider that a form of abuse when a child identifies one way and a caregiver is saying, no, you need to do this differently. If it's abuse, and if it's within the definition, a child can be removed from that environment and placed into protection where the abuse stops." If all of this sounds bizarre, that's because it is. It is also fascism. To remove a child from the home because the government disagrees with basic biology is beyond the pale of the reasonable. Unfortunately, it's not going to be long before leftists in the United States push the same thing. The first step on that road is the widely acclaimed spate of legislation banning so-called conversion therapy for children with homosexual tendencies. This is not an argument in favor of the efficacy of conversion therapy, which is iffy in even the best circumstances. But if a child is disturbed by homosexual feelings and you bring that child to a therapist to talk it through, that would now be considered illegal in states including California and New Jersey. As Scott Shackelford of Reason magazine explains, quote, "Bans on conversion therapy are fundamentally censorship of an idea, and there's a slippery slope and consequences that people with narrow interests in halting abusive treatment of gay and transgender teens simply do not grasp. This isn't a ban on particular dangerous technique like electroshock treatment, for example. It's a ban on anything, even just speech, coming from a licensed therapist that suggests homosexuality can be cured. It is dangerous to allow the government to control the classification of speech and to recast speech as something else just because commerce is involved. The next step will undoubtedly be removing children from parents who pursue such therapy in spite of the ban, purportedly for the good of the child. The left's next step could be to remove accreditation from schools that do not traffic in LGBT advocacy. After all, California has attempted to remove nonprofit status from the Boy Scouts. Schools in California have now mandated that kids learn about LGBT history in public schools. What happens when people homeschool and the state decides that homeschooling is inappropriate for children if they aren't taught the state's educational approach? It's not difficult to imagine Child Protective Services removing children whose parents won't teach them positively about the full spectrum of sexual orientation, in the interests of the child, of course. Or leftists could skip directly to the Ontario scenario. They could claim that transgender children are being shackled by their bigoted parents and must be protected by the state. This is scary stuff. It's particularly scary not only for religious parents, but for anyone who understands that there is no evidence that transgender feelings among children are unchanging, the vast majority of children with such feelings grow out of them, or that boys cannot actually become girls. In Ontario, the state has now placed itself in direct opposition to science and freedom. In the United States, the movement to do the same must be stopped now, before families are torn apart on behalf of a propagandistic sexual agenda. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.